My name's Michelle Underwood, and I'm the Coast Guard's SAPR Program Manager, and I'm inviting you to a storyteller session. When somebody shares their story, it's a form of narrative therapy. When we work with victims that have been traumatized, any form of trauma, it's initially difficult to revisit the trauma, and so trauma victims usually start with what we call their G version of the story. It's the safest version to tell yourself. Then that story oftentimes will grow into the PG version of the story, PG-13 version of the story, and sometimes the R and the X-rated version of the story. Be mindful that the content that you're going to hear today from our storyteller is graphic in nature, and it's a real lived experience. Should you decide that you would like to explore narrating your story, there's a host of helping professionals in the Coast Guard that can do that with you. Should you decide that you would like to share your story with a helping professional in the Coast Guard, remember, any one of the helping professionals can maintain your confidentiality and get you the help that you need so that you can stay viable in your relationships and viable in your job. Without further ado, I welcome you to Storytellers.
I am Master Chief Joanne Cloud. I have been in the Coast Guard for 21 years, and I am a survivor of multiple military sexual assaults, and I am currently the Reserve Command Master Chief for Sector Puget Sound. I joined the Coast Guard in 2003. I had my 19th birthday at boot camp. I'm from a very small town in Ohio, Hamilton, Ohio, and when I joined the Coast Guard, I was very young and very naive. After boot camp, I remember my dad driving me to Miami Beach, Florida. That's where I was headed as a non-rate. And my dad literally drove me from Ohio to Miami. And I remember him pulling away, thinking that he left his daughter in the care of this organization. And I didn't know anything at the time other than I was really excited to be there. The sponsor that they gave me when I arrived was a male non-rate, and it took him about one day to try to sleep with me. It was instant. I thought he was disgusting, and we did not get along. I was there on base for maybe a week while they tried to decide where to put me. I was slated to go to MSTA school. Ultimately, they put me in what they called Port Ops. Port Ops was a small group of Coast Guard people in literally the Port of Miami. The Coast Guard rented space there, and they had their own little unit, even though we belonged to the MSU. I arrived and reported in, and there was about roughly 20-something people at that little unit. I was the only female, except for the person in charge was a female lieutenant. It was a very interesting experience. I was brand new. I didn't know anything about the Coast Guard. I didn't know anything about anything. And they said, we're going to have you work and just start doing the job until you go to A school. At the time, there was a group of reservists on orders, 5 of them, and they were there to do security patrols and security inspections. The MTSA regulations were about to come out, and they worked for a civilian who was also in that office. My first couple months there, I did not fit in. Not only was I the only enlisted female, but I found that particular group of reservists to be disgusting. They only talked about strip clubs and cheating on their wife and all kinds of crazy stuff. We were supposed to, throughout the day, keep ourselves busy doing facility spot checks and harbor patrols. And they called the harbor patrols chocha patrols. And I learned that that was the Spanish word for a vagina. Within the first month, we were going on harbor patrols every day where they would, instead of doing the job, drive to South Beach, to the nude beach, and park the GV and then look at all the naked women. And I was stuck in the back seat of this GV, and there was nothing I could do about it. That's what we were going to do for the day. And they would make comments and sit there for hours and look at all the women that came by and then they would go to lunch, and then we would return to the office where they would put into the system that we had done a harbor patrol. I knew that it was wrong. I knew that, I was extremely uncomfortable, but I also was brand new. I had no idea what to do or what to say at the time. One of the members in the office, was first class, was supposed to be my direct supervisor. And he was constantly making comments in the sexual nature to me. And one day I passed him in the hallway and he asked me, "What's on your elbow?" And when I went to look at my elbow, he reached for my wrist like he was going to help me look, and then just put my hand on his private parts. That was the first incident. A couple weeks later, I was filing stuff in a filing cabinet on the bottom drawer. And as I bent down to file, he came by and he said, "While you're down there, why don't you hook me up?" And shoved his penis into my face. And everybody saw it. There were plenty of people. It was a small office. Nobody said a word. Everyone just laughed. At some point, I went to talk to the female lieutenant. I think I had in my mind that she was a woman, so she would want to help me if she knew what was going on. Also, she was in charge of the entire office. And her response to me was, "You're new, try not to make trouble while you're here." I put up with this for months, maybe about the 6 or 7 month mark. We had this secure room, no windows, and they had been putting facility security plans into this room and keeping them locked. And they had asked me to go find a facility security plan for a specific company and to review it. I went into the room to get the security plan, and the first class followed me in there and closed the door and proceeded to assault me. I was completely traumatized. I didn't say anything the rest of the day. I definitely didn't review the security plan. And I remember towards the end of the workday, a BM1 coming up and saying, "Why didn't you do the security plan? Don't be a piece of shit while you're here." And I just, again, was overwhelmed. So fast forward, I've gone to MSTA school. I've come back to the unit. Nothing changed. That person that assaulted me was in charge of my marks. I couldn't be around him. I wasn't sleeping. I was super stressed out. And the only one that finally noticed was a BM3. And I remember his name, BM3 Gervais. And he said, "You don't seem okay. What is wrong with you?" And I didn't tell him what happened. I just told him that I was having some trouble. And he said, "I'm going to send you to see the MasterChief on base. And if anybody asks you why you're not in the office today, you tell them you went to see the MasterChief, and I gave you permission to do so." So I went on base and I met with the command Master Chief at the time. I told the Master Chief everything from the Chocha patrols to the two, him putting his private parts in my face, exposing himself, the sexual assault. I told him everything. It was the first person that I said everything to. And after I was done talking, he said, "Well, I know exactly which person you're talking about, and this isn't the first time he's done this, so I will take care of it." I had no idea there were sexual assault programs. I didn't know anything about the Coast Guard. He didn't send me to medical. He didn't send me to what we now have as a SARC, nothing. He just said, "I'll take care of it. You go back to work." Right back to work in the same office with this person. In the next couple days, he must have had to talk with him because the first class, it was a PS1, came back and told the whole office that I turned him in for sexual assault. I mean, he told everybody. And if you've been in the Coast Guard, you know that the rumor mill, it takes about 30 seconds for everyone to know. So I remember it was a Friday, and I went on base to go to the exchange, and I was in line at the exchange, and the people behind me were talking about it. Like, "Oh, that's her. That's the girl." And at that time, my stress level was so bad, I couldn't even get in the GV with him. Like, I just didn't want to be near him. So there was a first class female on base, and also an MST. And so I went to talk with her. I think I was seeking some sort of comfort, a friend, something, and I was looking for it, I think, in another female. So I went to see her, even though I knew in the back of my head she was dating the MK2 in my port office. And I remember we went out on the rooftop of the building, and I told her what was going on, and I'll never forget it. She handed me an EAP card and said, this is if you want to talk to somebody else, but you're not going to do any good telling anybody what happened. They're a tight-knit group over there, and I can't help you. And I was crushed. I was like, okay, so the Master Chief didn't help, and she didn't help. The lieutenant basically told me to suck it up. So I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing, and I continued to go to work there. And they never removed him from the office. They never removed me from the office. And then my marks were due. And I remember I got a bunch of 3s. And I mean, I have, like, out of the gate already gotten multiple qualifications. I was a very hard worker. And I was upset about the 3s. So I asked for a meeting with the lieutenant, and she didn't want to meet with me. She tasked it out to a JG to meet with me. He met with me, him and the BM1 and the PS1 who had assaulted me. And I tried to explain to them that I didn't agree with the marks, and they told me basically to suck it up or I could do a formal appeal. I had no idea how to do a formal appeal at all, and I was entirely too stressed out. So at this time, there was an HS1 on the base, and one day we went over there for all hands. And on the way out to the parking lot to the GV, she stopped me and she said, I think you should come see me. And I got permission and went to medical, and she was amazing. She gave me full STD testing, talked to me about everything, and then she asked me, did you turn him in? And I said, yes, I told the command Master Chief. And she said, well, I'm proud of you. I hope they take care of it. At the same time, I left medical. I was walking through the parking lot, and that MST1 that I had confided in looked at me, looked at the person next to her, and said, watch out for that one. She's quick to throw a sexual assault card. The Coast Guard left me for dead at this unit. They did nothing. They left me there for months with him. Nothing was done. Not a word. Finally, one day, he had asked me to do something, and I was disrespectful to a first class and snapped back. And so they asked me to go see the commander on base. So I went to see the commander, and it was a female commander, and I told her, again, everything that had happened, from the Chocha patrols to everything he had done, including the assault. I told her I had seen the Master Chief. I told her I had seen the MST1. I told her everything. And she said to me, you're just a cog in the wheel. There's big Coast Guard, and you're just one little cog in the wheel. And then she proceeded to reprimand me for not coming forward sooner about the Chocha patrols, that was a waste of government time, and I was at fault because I let it go on as long as I did. And I should have come and said something to somebody sooner. Completely glazed over the sexual assault, said nothing. Maybe 5-6 months later, I had made second class. I was doing great, getting qualified despite the circumstances. And I was moved on base into the investigation shop. They normally don't put petty officers in this shop, but the shop was severely understaffed and they needed help. I went to IO school. I came back, and in this shop, there was a male lieutenant, myself, a female YN3. That was the whole shop. So I had all this unprocessed trauma from what had happened and all this anger at the fact that they never helped me. So I'm not going to say I had the best attitude while I was there, but I was going through a lot. Nobody ever mentioned that maybe I should seek counseling or get help. they asked me to attend a civilian training course in New Orleans for a week. The training course was going to cover recreational boating accidents. And I remember before I left, I asked the lieutenant, I think he might have been a JG, but I asked him, why are we going to this training? We don't do recreational boating investigations. Just curious. And he told me to lose the attitude and attend the training, and that if the Coast Guard was going to spend money training me, it was a privilege, so I needed to not ask questions. I attended the training. It actually was a very cool training put on by a local sheriff's department, and it was for all walks of people from every different agency about drunk boating and recreational boating accidents. At the end of the course, the instructor asked, do any of you have like a memorandum of understanding where a different agency helps you with your boating investigations? And I raised my hand and I said, well, we do. Like in Miami Beach, there's recreational boats everywhere. The Coast Guard could never do all that. We have an MOU with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They handle the recreational boating accidents. We handle more of the search and rescue stuff. And he was like, awesome, I know there's a lot of people out there that do that. What I didn't know is there was another coastie in the class, and it was an officer, commander from the district office. I didn't know. So apparently he did not like my response to the instructor. He contacted the JG that I was working for and said, you know, why did you send a petty officer to this class? You know, she made this comment, and it makes it look like we don't care about this training. So I got back from the training, and the JG asked me if I would step outside and talk to him. Went outside, and I remember we were adjacent from a smoke pit where a lot of the cutter personnel would go to smoke. And it was full. There was a lot of people in there smoking, and we were kind of off to one side. And the JG just starts screaming at me. And it just, for some reason, that unprocessed trauma just flashed. And the only way I can describe it is it felt like liquid heat inside my body. And he's screaming at me, telling me that I'm a piece of shit. Why did you go there? I told you not to ask questions. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You embarrassed us in front of the district commander. And he was losing it, to the point that the people in the smoke pit had literally stopped mid-smoke just to look over and see what was going on. I felt uncomfortable, and so I chose to walk away from him. I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't going to stand there and feel that feeling internally. As I walked away, he proceeded to chase me. And I will tell you that I made it up 3 flights of stairs like it was Cape May, and they were asking us to move our, I flew up that staircase. He was behind me the whole time. And the only reason he was not able to get a hold of me is because I was fast. And I went inside and I hid in the bathroom for probably upwards of an hour. I knew he couldn't enter the female head. We had no chief, we had no first class, so I contacted I came out of the head and went to the command MasterChief's office, and they told me he was TDY. And the senior chief in the yeoman shop said, is it an emergency? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, well, we're gonna get you his cell phone number. It was a new Master Chief, not the one that knew about my assault. So I waited in the bathroom. They got me his phone number, and I called this Master Chief. And I said, hi, we don't know each other. I know you're new to the unit and you're incoming, but this happened to me today with this JG, and I don't know what to do, and I'm extremely uncomfortable. And he said, go home. I went home. The JG, I had 32 missed calls from him. I didn't answer. I texted the Master Chief and said, do I have to answer? Am I going to get in more trouble? He said, no, don't answer. I'll call him myself. The next morning I came to work, and the Master Chief told me, there's a senior chief on base. He's going to help you. You're going to have a meeting with this JG. We went into a room on the bottom deck of the building, a room similar to the room I was assaulted in, no windows, small conference table. It was myself, a senior chief, the JG, and the commander. The JG proceeded to, I think, apologize in his own way. It was very awkward. And the senior chief next to me, I looked at him. What am I supposed to do? This man just physically freaked out on me and then chased me up a flight of stairs. Like, what if he would have caught me in the stairwell and I wasn't fast enough? And the senior chief said to me, you don't get to ruin his career because you're upset. So if you file a formal complaint, you're going to ruin his career. And you need to think about that. If I were you, I would accept apology and go upstairs and go back to work. So I went upstairs and went back to work for him. So now I have all this unprocessed trauma. I have sexual harassment, a sexual assault, a command that left me for dead in an office, didn't help me. And now I have a male lieutenant that chased me up a flight of stairs and freaked out on me. So I can't say that I was in the best headspace. But I did the job, I got qualified, and in a sense, as sad as it sounds, I think I just accepted the culture that I was in. I don't know if I just compartmentalized it, but I accepted it. I made first class and I left the unit and I went onto recruiting duty. I got stationed at the recruiting office in Vancouver, Washington, and I remember when I got there, I was just a hot mess. I was like so beat up from being stationed in Miami that I got there, and I remember the chief was just so calm and collected and kind, and I must have looked like the human version of like a bouncy ball. I was all over the place. This was a time when the Coast Guard had people beating down the door to join, and we had to take turns deciding who could go to Cape May because there wasn't enough rack space. So I asked the chief, I said, Chief, what can I do that nobody else wants to do since we're all fighting over who can ship out first? And he said, you can go do reserve recruiting. Nobody wants to do it. It's too much paperwork. Perfect. So I contacted the local units, found out when the reserve drill weekend was, and I educated myself on reservists and reserve recruiting. About this time, I get a text message from the MasterChief in Miami that had helped me when the lieutenant chased me. And he had asked me if I wanted to fly back and stay with him in his house and spend some time because he felt like we had a connection. And did I want to spend time with him? Because he would pay for my plane ticket. No, I did not want to spend time with him or take the offer of his plane ticket. At the time, I'm, again, immersing myself in learning the world of reservists so that I could be a good recruiter. And there was a senior chief that floats to the surface, wants to teach me all about the reserves. He's a reservist. He can help me, make me a great recruiter. So I began doing reserve recruiting, and it turns out I'm really good at it. Reservists are amazing, unique people that work a civilian job and do Coast Guard time. I loved it. About 1 year into recruiting, the commanding officer asked me to attend their version, they call it a hub, but they're all hands where they bring all the chiefs that run the recruiting offices together for a meeting and like 3 or 4 days of training. He said, I want you to come, I'm gonna fly you out here to this hub, and I want you to teach a reserve recruiting course to everybody. Keep it down to about 45 minutes. So I make the training course, I run it through the recruiters in my office to see if it needs edits, and I fly to Texas to give this training. I'm a first class, I'm in TROPS, and I'm standing in a room full of 86 chiefs and the entire command staff for recruiting command to give this training. I give the training, I feel like I did decent. The chiefs clapped, it was over, and they take a break. And we are standing in, the training was in like a hotel conference room, so we're standing in this like lobby area where they had coffee and stuff set up for the chiefs or whoever needed it. And one of the chiefs is getting coffee, and he gives me the side eye, and he's like, well, you really are full of yourself, aren't you? Telling us how to do our job when you're a first class. If I wanted any of your lip, I'd reach in your pants and get it myself. And I remember just being stunned. Like, I just flew all the way out here to give this training. I was super proud of myself. And he says that to me, and it instantly liquid heat, my whole body. The same feeling that I had when I was assaulted, same feeling I had when I had to sit in the back of that GV and do the Chocha patrols, same exact feeling when I got chased up a flight of steps. And I didn't tell anybody or say anything because there had to be 10 chiefs getting coffee that heard it. No one said a word. No one even batted an eyelash at his comment. In that exact moment, a lieutenant from Recruiting Command pulls me aside and says, hey, can we talk? Let's debrief, give you some feedback on your training. At this time, all of the chiefs go back into the conference room, and I'm in the lobby with the lieutenant. And he sits me down on a couch, he's across from me, and he begins to tell me, I had a female that worked for me like you once. She was a YN1 type, real smart like you, super motivated. I let her clean the coffee pot and take out the trash. I just want to make sure you understand that even though the captain asked you to come give this training, that you remember your place. So between the chief's comment about reaching in my pants and this lieutenant, I was speechless. I'm like, what is happening? But at the same time, I didn't tell anybody because being in Miami taught me that if you tell somebody, nobody cares. And I just kept thinking of that commander telling me, you're just a cog in the wheel. Giant wheel, you're nothing. So I packed up and flew back to Recruiting Command. At this time, I am now, pregnant with my daughter, fast forward, and I'm 9 months pregnant. And when I say 9 months pregnant, I'm like a week away from my scheduled C-section date. And a CGIS agent calls the recruiting office and asks for me. I get on the phone and he says, hey, are you logged onto your computer? I'm agent so-and-so. And I'm like, yes, I'm logged on, sure. And he says, back in the day, did you used to date BM1 whoever? And I'm like, yes, but that was like 3 years ago. And he said, okay, well, he's under investigation and I need you to look at some photos. And I said, am I in trouble? Because if you're in the Coast Guard and CGIS calls, your blood pressure goes up. And he says, no, you're not in trouble. I just need you to look at some photos and help me with my investigation. So he sends a secure file to my computer and I open up the photos and it's just pictures of women's breasts. And I said, what am I looking at? And he said, well, we found over 300 inappropriate pictures on his duty phone and this one's labeled Joanne. I need to know if those are your breasts. And I was like, okay, well, I know what my own breasts look like and those aren't it. And this is a really weird conversation. And he said, well, if they're not yours, why is it labeled with your name? And I said, I don't know, you just told me there's 300 photos. You think I'm the only person named Joanne? And like, the whole conversation was off. And I couldn't understand why I was being contacted if I wasn't the one being investigated. So we got off the phone and I went and told the chief, this just happened. And he said, are you serious? That's really weird. And I said, it is weird, right? And he was like, I don't know, it's CGIS. So 2 days later, the same CGIS agent calls again. So now I am 3 days away from my scheduled C-section. I'm trying to finish up my applicants, hand them off to the other recruiters so I can go on maternity leave. My head is, completely in 100 other places. And the CGIS agent calls again. And he says, I don't believe what you said to me and I want you to look at these photos again. And I said, is it the same photos? And he said, yes. Well, I don't need to look at them again. They're not my breast. And I don't think you should call here anymore. And he said, well, I'll come there in person. I'm CGIS. And I said, well, you can come here in person, but I'll be on maternity leave. And we ended the phone call. I had my daughter. I was able to stay home with my daughter for a little over 2 months after she was born. I had tons of leave saved up, and again, the chief I had at the recruiting office was amazing. So I came back from maternity leave, and like any mom, was wanting to be with my kid and conflicted on going back to work, but I still loved the Coast Guard, and I loved recruiting. So I went back to work, and then eventually that same senior chief that had taken an interest in me when I was working to try to learn about the reserves, he surfaced. And his behavior was extremely creepy. He would text me, he would contact me, he would ask me to meet him for stuff, and he was married, and I just found it very weird. And I think I realized then that predators come in all shapes and sizes. Not everybody was going to shove me in a room and lock the door and sexually assault me. Some of them were just going to hang in the wings and look for a weak, vulnerable moment. What if I had accepted one of those invitations to meet him, or if I had let myself have too much to drink and be in his company? He was absolutely going to take advantage. So I went out of my way to not be around him and not make contact. I think that was the first step in me realizing that, again, there's different types of predators and that I needed to be careful. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to take a break and be with my daughter. So my contract was up, and rather than re-enlisting, I went into the reserve. I received local orders, and I took a civilian job on base in Portland in the IO shop. I had a qual, they needed an admin assistant, it was perfect. So I remember my first week of work as a Coast Guard civilian in that shop. And there was this tiny shop, 2 warrant officers, a lieutenant and a lieutenant commander. They were all very kind, very nice. And I remember the warrant was showing me how to access their files. I'm going to be the admin assistant. He wants to show me where everything goes. And the door opens, and this man walks in. Tall man, civilian clothes, and he identifies himself as the CGIS agent. The same CGIS agent that had contacted me and asked me to look at the pictures when I was pregnant. And he says, "Can I talk to you outside?" Liquid heat, instantly, my whole body. I don't know if that's my body's like warning system, but I felt uncomfortable. But it's a CGIS agent, so I said, sure, okay. Already, everyone in the entire office is now staring at me. It's my first week of work, and CGIS is asking me to step out back. Great. So we go out back, and he proceeds to say, you know, I'm still investigating BM1 so-and-so. You really didn't help me with my case. And I said, well, I'm really not concerned about BM1 so-and-so. I dated him. That was years ago. I could care less. And he said, well, he had inappropriate relations with this non-rate at his unit, and that reminds me of you. She's just like you. She looks like you. She's a high performer, sailor of the quarter. Is that how he met you? And I said, no. I dated him. It was consensual, and it didn't work out. And he was like, okay, well, you know, if you want to adjust your statement, I still have those pictures. And I said, I don't want to adjust anything. I would like to not have another meeting about this. Over the next month, as I learned the job, I also learned that CGIS comes into the IO shop on a frequent basis when they have to talk about cases relating to the vessels or, you know, illegal activity. And I saw him all the time, and he always would make comments. I had a picture of my daughter on my desk, and he said, is that your daughter? And I said, yes. And he was like, oh, was that like out of wedlock, kind of a whore thing, or are you married? And is he a coastie too? Do you like sleep with lots of coasties? And he said it again in front of the whole office. Even if the office was only 4 people, nobody said a word. Nobody even flinched. And I couldn't stand it. So eventually, recruiting command, I made chief, and recruiting command asked me, did I want to come back on orders to do reserve recruiting? Being a chief on orders paid more than the civilian job, so I went back to recruiting command. At this time, I'm a brand new chief. I don't know much. I'm going to be with the active duty chiefs because I'm on active duty. So I knew enough about the chiefs in Portland from having been a civilian. and they invited me to my first Chiefs call. And I remember being really excited. Like, this is what you work for, right? To make Chief, to help people. They said, we're going to go to off-site for a Chiefs call, and then we'll have lunch. I got into a GV with 3 Chiefs. There were 7 of us total. And we went off-site for the Chiefs call, and it turned out to be the Dancing Bear Strip Club in Portland, Oregon. And I was confused, but I also wanted to fit in. So I went into the establishment with them. And I remember sitting there, and there was one other female chief. And I looked at her, and I said, is this normal? And she said, welcome to the Chief's mess. You should have seen what we did on the cutters. I'm a cutterman. I could show you the real way to be broken into the Chief's mess. And they proceeded to not have a Chief's call and just watch strippers for an hour. In hindsight, we didn't have Ubers back then, but I guess I could have left and called someone for a ride. But in my mind, I just wanted to fit in, so I stayed. And ultimately, eventually we left, had lunch, and went back. Later on, the Chiefs were active with other local Chiefs messes. They would have a consolidated mess call where all the Chiefs come together. So I met other Chiefs. There were no other females other than her. And they did a Chiefs camping trip, outing. And I remember it fell on a weekend when my daughter would be at her dad's. And so I thought, you know, I should go and learn who some of these other Chiefs are from the other units and maybe, you know, make some friends. And at the Chiefs camping trip, it was basically booze fest. Everybody was completely smashed, just drinking right out of the Fireball bottle. We're not even going to take shots. We're just going to drink right out of the bottle. Everybody was really drunk. I had driven myself. I had no intentions of camping or staying over. The campground was a drivable distance, so I was just going to hang out, have dinner, maybe socialize, and drive myself back. Around 10 p.m., I decided I was going to go walk across the campground to the camp restrooms, go to the bathroom, and then drive home, which was about a 45-minute drive. A chief warrant officer, who was a previous chief, followed me into the bathroom and proceeded to rape me violently while in the bathroom stall. It didn't matter that I screamed and made a scene. We were so far away on the campground, nobody was going to hear. And he was smashed. And all I remember was his bad breath. I don't know why, but that's what I remembered. And he laughed and then left me in the bathroom. I drove myself home, took a week of leave, and stayed home and tried to process it. And I think in processing it, I was mad at myself. I was mad that I had been in this situation again. Like somehow it was my fault. Like, you were already in this situation before. Why aren't you more vigilant? Why did you even go? Why were you so worried about fitting in with the Chiefs when you knew from the minute they took you to a strip club that you weren't going to fit in? And I just really beat myself up. I did not tell anyone, and I went back to work. He did not work, you know, at the recruiting office, so it's not like I had to see him. But I kept it to myself, and again, unprocessed trauma. So eventually, at a Chief's all hands during the day on a base, I attempted to tell the other female chief, which, let's be honest, that probably wasn't my best idea, but I did it anyway. And I said, you know, what do you think of Chief Warrant Officer so-and-so? And she's like, oh, he's great. He's got a wife and all these kids, and he's just an amazing family man. And I just said nothing. I realized then that she was not my person. It was not going to be comfortable, and I said nothing. But by now, between how I was treated in Miami, being chased up a flight of stairs, it's all compounding. And then sexual assault, sexual trauma, sexual harassment, all the horrible comments that have happened. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. That by the time we got to the second assault, I really was not okay mentally. But I also had no help. I wasn't smart enough to maybe go talk to somebody. I think I was too scared, and you just feel embarrassed. You feel shame, like somehow it's your fault. And if people know that a sexual act occurred, it was just so gross, and I just couldn't do it. So I kept it to myself. Right around this time, we got a new supervisor. For all the recruiting offices, there's always a master chief and lieutenant that oversee a region of offices. We got new master chief, new lieutenant. And my chief came to me one day and said, hey, I'm going to send you to California. You're going to train these 2 recruiting offices and come back. Have a good trip. You'll get to meet the new master chief because he's going to meet you while he's doing one of those office visits. So I go to California. I go to the first recruiting office to do the first training. It goes great. I give them reserve training. And then I go fly into the next office. And I'm in the hotel at the check-in counter, and I'm checking in for my room. And the gentleman next to me says, are you Chief Cloud? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, well, I'm Master Chief so-and-so. And I'm like, oh, nice to meet you. And he was checking in at the same time. And then he looks at me and he says, just so you know, I fucking hate reservists. I just want to be really clear about that. I know you're a reservist on orders. I hate reservists. I think you're useless. So, I mean, I'll see what you have to say in the training, but don't expect much of a reaction from me. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. I already have like an entire suitcase of unpacked man trauma. Let's add this guy to the plate. So the next day we go to the recruiting office, and he walked in, and he, everyone's kind of like just waiting for training to start. And he was getting a coffee, and he looked at me and he said, you see that? And I said, no, Master Chief, see what? And he said, see how everyone's looking at me because I'm a Master Chief? Yeah, that's what's up. And I'm instantly just like, I'm not going to last long with this dude today. So I go first, I give my training, the training is over, and then he was having a office visit with the crew of recruiters. And there was a female recruiter, first class, raised her hand and started kind of putting him in the hot seat and asking some questions around climate and leadership in the office. He was getting visibly upset, and they also had a female C-Spy student attached that was there working in the office. So the whole time I'm watching this interaction between the Master Chief and the YN1, and I see that the C-Spy student is just like also watching, and it's getting a little heated. And then he finally makes a comment to sit her down. And he said, if I wanted any of your back talk, I'll let you know, but know your place and have a seat. And it instantly, for me, just brought up all of those paper cuts, all of the same comments that I had experienced as a woman in the Coast Guard. And I was just furious. And I'm like, I have to get away from this guy. So I flew home. My chief asked me how the training went, and I told him, the Master Chief sucks, and here's what happened. And he's like, ooh, all right. So that chief was retiring, a new chief was coming in, and I found out I was going to make senior chief. And I remember at the time, we were eligible to compete for senior chief, and I wasn't paying attention. But I went to the Chiefs Academy that year. My amazing chief at the recruiting office retired. I went to the Chiefs Academy. And I'm at the Chiefs Academy, and I walk in the classroom, and I see there's about 4 or 5 other women in the class, which is awesome. And I hear this one female chief say to someone, that's bullshit. And I instantly wanted to sit by her. I'm like, that's my people. I'm sitting with her. And I met her, and we were inseparable after that. Amazing HS chief, had been active duty just like me for a long time, had transitioned into the reserves, and the Chiefs Academy was great the first week. The second week, I'm in my barracks room at the Chiefs Academy in Petaluma, and I get a note shoved under my door. And it is a love note from one of the married chiefs in the class. And he wrote me a poem. And I thought, this is bizarre, and I'm really just not in the mood. It's too much. So when we got to class, I handed him his poem back and told him, no thank you. Maybe you should give that to your wife. Later that evening, we had a social in the Chief's mess, and then I was walking back to my room, and he followed me to my room. And my fight or flight kicked in, and I remember running full sprint up a flight of stairs again and slamming the barracks door shut and locking it. We had our own rooms. The next day, I told my classmates and the instructor what had happened, and they moved his seat to the back of the classroom so that he did not sit next to me for the duration of the class. For the rest of my time at the Chiefs Academy, one of my male classmates would walk me back to my room after every dinner or function. That is how they chose to deal with it. I appreciated it. That particular chief that walked me back was an amazing man, and that was great. But I already felt that anger brewing again, that liquid heat, because their solution in dealing with this man, you're married, you're writing me an inappropriate letter, trying to follow me back to my barracks room. Nothing. They moved his chair to the back of the class. So I returned to recruiting command. Somewhere down the way, I make senior chief, and I'm asking myself, what are you going to do with it? You never thought you'd make senior chief. You never thought you'd make it this far. What can you do with it? And I thought, you know what I can do with it is I can give back. No more bullshit, no more comments, no more nothing. I'm all done listening to people's crap. Like, not one more comment, not one more running up a flight of stairs. I'm going to fight back. And in that moment, I realized that I needed to tell somebody about the sexual assault from the camping trip. And now I was educated enough to know that we had a SARC. So I contacted the District 13 SARC. And Jennifer Parrish, I will never forget how amazing she was. She said, I'm going to ask you some questions, and you don't have to answer any of them if you don't want to. Just know that I'm asking you these questions so I can figure out how to best help you next. And she asked me some questions. We talked on the phone for probably 45 minutes. And ultimately, I decided that I wanted to keep it to myself, but I at least wanted her to know so I could get some help. She referred me to the base Seattle clinic and said, you don't have to go in. It's not a fresh rape. They don't need to do anything, but there's a really good psychiatrist on staff, and I want you to have a meeting with her. There were no available appointments anytime soon, so they made me a phone appointment with this lady. And I remember her calling. I don't remember her name, but she was like, tell me what happened, tell me what you're comfortable telling me. And I told her everything. And she said, why don't you tell me how you're feeling? Like, tell me how about your thoughts. And I told her, I don't sleep. All I feel is anger and aggression. Like, I want to take a baseball bat and just bash people in the face or break windows. And we went through this whole behavior analysis assessment where for years I had been carrying this shame and this guilt, and I was just so angry. Every time somebody made a comment, I just wanted to punch them in the teeth. You can't punch people, actually. So I'm telling her, like, I'm just angry. I don't know what to do other than to literally whip someone's ass. And she laughed and she said, honey, that's called PTSD. Like, you have PTSD and anxiety, and that's why you're not sleeping. I'm going to refer you for counseling. Like, we're going to help you out. And it was the first time somebody had validated what was going on with me with that heat feeling running through my body. It's a trauma response. It's my body's way of responding to trauma. And I didn't understand it. So I started therapy. And I got the most amazing civilian therapist who, he was just great. Really helped me process everything in that suitcase. What are we going to do with it? It's not your fault. You don't need to be ashamed. Around this time, recruiting command called and said, we want you to go be the PIO for a sexual harassment complaint at one of our recruiting offices. Female first class has come forward that, you know, the chief in the office is doing some things he shouldn't. We'd like you to go down there and, you know, be the PIO. So they send me the instructions, the manual on how to do this so that I don't mess it up. I go to the recruiting office, I fly in, I do the investigation. It's crystal clear that the chief is gross and everything she said is valid, and plenty of witnesses. I come back, I write the report, I submit it to legal. And something right there changed in me in realizing that I have an avenue to help people rather than just sit back and be a bystander when things are wrong. That chief was masted, and I remember at the mast, we were on the phone. They had the chief fly out to headquarters to recruiting command to do the mast. And the victim and I were on the phone. And everything about that chief was leading towards a sexual assault was coming. But she reported it in time. She stepped up. She was brave. And I remember the captain saying, before I dole out my findings, you know, Master Chief, the command Master Chief, is there anything you would like to say? And he said, yeah, you know, Chief, I know you're upset and you've been in a long time. It's just a blip on the radar. That's what this is. It's just a blip. You're not going to lose your whole career. You're not going to lose your retirement. I hope that you could just learn from this. And I remember just being baffled, like a blip on the radar, and the victim is literally on the phone. So the captain doled out his findings. Of course, he gave the chief, you know, punishments and stuff like that. But later that day, the CO called, and he said, what did you think of the mast? And I said, can I have permission to speak freely? And he said, yes. And I said, you re-victimized her when you let your Master Chief talk. And I told him why. What Master Chief said was inappropriate. You just unvalidated everything she did by being brave and coming forward. And he was like, oh, I never thought about that. I'm so sorry. Like, I'll call her and check in. The next day, the command Master Chief called me because, of course, the captain told him what I said. And he said, I'm sorry we don't see eye to eye, but you know, as chiefs, we have to protect each other. And I said, no, Master Chief, we don't. There's such thing called the weak link. We learned that at initiation, and we don't. At that point, the command Master Chief did not think much of me, nor did the Master Chief supervisor that I had that had made the inappropriate comments and told me he hated reservists. So my stress level and having to interact with that Master Chief that did my marks and supervised me, it was kind of always just a notch above where it should be. I knew he didn't like reservists or me. I also didn't think much of him because of his comments that he had made to the YN1. So it was uncomfortable. He did my marks. And another new chief comes into the recruiting office at this point. And this chief looks at me and says, well, you're a reservist. I know you're on orders here, but you're not on our PAL, so you can't work here. You'll have to find somewhere else to work. And I called the Master Chief, and I'm like, he's basically kicking me out of the office because I'm not on his PAL. I've been working here for years. And the Master Chief says, oh, Senior Chief, you again. Well, I guess you'll have to figure it out. Maybe work out of the GV. I'm like, okay. So then I decide, again, you made Senior Chief. You don't have to put up with this. So I said, no, Master Chief, I'm not going to work out of the GV. You're going to call this guy, and you're going to figure it out. Didn't go well. He said, I don't work for you. You work for me. You figure yourself out. And he hung up. So at this point, I can only imagine the conversations that occurred at headquarters and them saying that I was a problem or that I was too opinionated. I know the conversations happened. You know, you always hear what people say. But I was also in therapy, working on myself, and just not in the mood for any more negativity. So I go on base to a chief's call, and I see a female commander pass by that I was stationed with in Miami. She was an ensign back when I was in Miami. And we're catching up, and she said, where are you at? And I said, well, technically the recruiting office, but currently the car. And she said, well, I'm the XO here. what if we trade? What if I give you space on this base to have an office and do your recruiting stuff, and in turn, you could help me with something? And I said, sure, what do you want help with? And she's like, we don't have a single female chief on this base. We have an all-male chief's mess, and our DEOC survey keeps saying that there's mistrust with the chief's mess. Maybe you could help. Perfect. This is a way for me to give back. So I move into an office on base and start eating lunch in the chief's mess every day and just kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. And what it ultimately came down to is the chief's mess was not bad. It just had a couple bad eggs that were the good old boys club, making their perverted jokes and being ridiculous and not understanding that it's offensive. And that particular unit had a lot of enlisted females at the time. So rather than taking it back to the commander, I just did self-policing inside the mess. And I told them, you can't talk like that. You can't make these comments. We can't do this stuff. Did they like me? No. Ultimately, there was a chance to be chief of the mess. The chief of the mess we had, MasterChief Judd, really amazing man that taught me how to be a good chief, was getting orders to a polar icebreaker. And I said, can I be chief of the mess? And he said, well, you're a reservist, but you're on orders for like the next gazillion years, so who cares? Sure, let me ask the district. And the district master chief said, sure, I know Joanne, she's amazing, let her do it. And so a female reservist went to be chief of the mess for 80 chiefs at a sector. It was fantastic. In the beginning, there was only myself and one other female chief, and she was great. But I remember going in there and thinking, it's not about me. I'm not special. It's about how I can help other people. That's what I'm here for. That's what this has to be about. And I served as chief of the mess for a year and a half, and it was powerful. And I told myself, you know, I'm not going to retire until I can look across the room in a chief's mess and see an equal number of women in here. That's when I'll know it's okay for me to go. Around this time in therapy, I learned that you got to be more human and be able to just laugh and talk about stuff. That's how, you know, people connect. That's how people get through their trauma. Right around this time, I had also been single for a very long time, and I felt like I was finally ready to date. And I chose to start dating a fellow Coastie. He was a single dad, he had a lot of kids, and I had a daughter, so I thought, like, how cool would that be? This is gonna be great. I dated him maybe 5 months in. I get a phone call from his sister that he's been arrested. And I'm thinking, huh? You're supposed to be at work. Did he go out maybe with the chiefs and get drunk and like get a DUI? Like, what is going on? Long story short, he'd been arrested for a rape 13 years prior. Somebody finally reported it, and the state of Oregon came and got him. And in that moment, every bit of trauma I had attempted to work through just came right out. So the next day at work, here comes the CGIS agent. This time, thank the Lord, it's a different one, to ask me about the person I had been dating. And the good news is this particular CGIS agent was polite. He said, obviously we're looking into this because he was arrested. Is there anything that you want to talk about? And I said, no. Like, literally, this is a Netflix movie minus the dead body in the rug. I don't even know what he did 13 years ago. I've known him for 5 months. I got nothing. I was so mortified. As a survivor of 2 sexual assaults, I beat myself up. How is it possible that he is a predator, that this could have occurred and you never saw that in him? Like, where were the red flags that you blew by? That this person has this in their past, you didn't know about it, and here you are. And I remember the captain of the base calling me, amazing man, and saying, this one's not on you. You didn't know. Take all the time you need. Like, do you need to leave? Like, I'm not even going to charge you leave. What do you need? And I said, I need some time. And I could no longer work on the base. And I don't know why, because it wasn't my crime. It wasn't something I did, but I was so embarrassed and so ashamed that I would have dated somebody like that. Even though you really can't tell when you're dating someone, you don't know. You don't get to run a background check. But I was just mortified, and I, for 2 years, couldn't step foot on that base. I went back to the recruiting office, worked in a coat closet, I was fine with it, and I just couldn't do it. Therapy. So eventually my therapist is like, again, same thing, this is not yours, you didn't do this, there's no way of knowing, like, you gotta let this go. You gotta let this be what it is and move on. About 8 months later, I was in the recruiting office and a sheriff comes to the front door and he asks for me. And I'm assuming it's one of my applicants because most of the people I put in the reserve were law enforcement officers from local jurisdictions. Instead, he serves me with papers. And I remember opening the papers, like now everyone in the recruiting office is looking at me and I'm looking at them and it's uncomfortable. And it's not actual law papers. It's a letter from that guy in the prison. The Coastie that I dated for 5 months that was arrested for a rape that is now in the Oregon State Penitentiary. And I'm thinking like, whose life is this? What is happening here? And he proceeded to send letters constantly to my address. I just kept chucking them all in the trash. Like, I'm not gonna open these. I don't know what he wants. He wouldn't let it go. And it got to the point where I like quit checking the mail. And I had to tell my therapist, I don't check the mail anymore. And then I started not sleeping again. And my therapist is like, this is not gonna work, you need some help. You gotta tell somebody that he's harassing you. And you would think after all the years of the assaults, the trauma, the paper cuts, that I'd be like, you know what, you're right, I'm gonna go tell somebody. Couldn't do it. I was so embarrassed still that I had even dated this guy. That was like, how am I gonna go tell the Coast Guard I'm being harassed? I'm a senior chief. I'm supposed to, look a certain way, act a certain way. How do I tell them my personal life is a slight train wreck? And so I just couldn't do it. And then one day I had been out at a recruiting event. I come back to the office and the OS1 says, oh, the sheriff was here looking for you again. And I knew in that moment, okay, this can't continue. Like, it's going to ruin my work. So I remembered a commander that I had been stationed with in the reserve that was, high ranking in the local police department. And I called him and I said, sir, I need help. Can you meet for coffee? Amazing man, didn't skip a beat. He met me for coffee hours later. And I explained to him what was happening. And he said, I'm gonna send you to see a friend. And he sent me downtown in Vancouver, Washington, it was this unmarked secret building, and this detective let me in. And I remember I was sitting with his friend, this detective, and a lady detective. And I told him what was going on, and they said, look, we can see in our system a lot of stuff about him. None of it's good. Plus the rape conviction. We're gonna help you. What you need is a restraining order. And I just started crying. I think it was the first time I cried in maybe 15 years. But the lady detective was just like, you know what? This is not yours to carry. He's a freak. Nope, do not put this on yourself. And I ended up getting a restraining order. And I also remember that just how empowering it was to sit. I mean, you gotta sit in a courtroom. I hate courthouses. You got to sit in this courtroom and wait your turn, which means you hear everyone else's story before yours because they're all in there seeking restraining orders. But there was something empowering in it, again, in speaking up. And I came back to the office, and I remember the OS1 saying to me, good for you. That's human. Good for you. You made it this far. And right there was a turning point for me. And I decided if I'm going to do all this traveling for recruiting command, and given trainings and being a senior chief, I need to be more human. It's not about looking perfect. It's not about being the perfect Coastie. It's about us helping each other. And as I began to travel, I just had a different mindset. And instead of saying, do you need this training? are you working on advancement or your EPMEs? Instead, I was just human. How are you? Tell me about your life. Do you have a pet, goldfish, plant? Are you married? And I just really made it more about getting to know people. I had no idea the impact that would have. Over my travels, I would talk to people, meet people, and they would share their stories. And I realized I am not the only one that has these experiences, that has these stories. And I remember sitting at home on a Sunday night, and my phone rang, and it was a CS2 from somewhere I had given training. And she said, "Senior Chief, I need help." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I have a friend. She's in a domestic violence situation, and she's too scared to tell her command. Will you talk with her?" And I said, 100%. So on a Sunday night at 9 o'clock, I called a stranger that I had never met, didn't know, another coastie. She tells me what's going on. And I asked her, "What do you need?" And I told her, "You need to tell your command, you need help." And she's like, I can't sit in there, I'm too embarrassed." And I paid for my own flight to San Diego, and I contacted her command chief. And 2 days later, we sat in his office, and I let her tell him everything she needed. And I realized if I had not been so open with my story, they wouldn't have even reached out to me for help. And from that came something beautiful. And I get phone calls all the time from people. They want to talk about their sexual assault. They're too scared to go to the SARC. They don't want to tell their command. They need help with a personal life issue. And I realized in 2022, I got a lot of phone calls, and I changed my number in global to my cell phone. Like, people can call anytime. You don't want me to tell your command unless it's, suicidal thoughts or something that I have to tell. I won't. I'll just be here. I'll just listen. And I realized being human, being vulnerable, sharing your story opens the gateway for you to be a much better leader than I ever would have been if I would have just been the senior chief. My therapist was like, "This is amazing. You are getting the healing you never got by helping others. Do great things, help other people." And so over the years, I've talked to so many people, mainly about their sexual assaults. They didn't, it's all fear-based. People don't come forward because they're scared, they're embarrassed, and they're ashamed. And they have to work with these people. The Coast Guard has not always been amazing at handling the cases. So they're terrified they'll be thrust back into that environment and everybody will know their secret. Finally, in 2023, I decided I'm going to keep track of how many phone calls. I don't have to write their names. I don't have to write their information or betray their trust. But I want to know, how much of this underground network occurs. And a lot of it is phone calls that maybe someone calls me and says, "Hey, I heard about your story. I need help." Maybe I just, refer them to the next person that I know that lives in their area that also shared an assault. It was a very high volume of calls that I counted for 2023. And in November of 2023, an ME1 reached out to me and said, "Hey, back when I was a third class, I was assaulted. You really helped me, and I never forgot you, and I wanted to thank you. And if there's anything I can ever do, let me know." And I said, "Well, how do you feel about talking to someone that lives right in your area that has been assaulted recently? What if I connected you two?" And she said, "I'm here for it." And it was a male, non-rate, in her area. And she sent me a picture 2 days later of them at Starbucks having coffee together. And for me, that was full circle. Everything I'd been through, the assaults, death by 1,000 paper cuts and horrible comments, the trauma of accidentally dating the wrong person and having it on display for the world to see, it was full circle by connecting those two. And if I could continue to do that, that's what mattered. When I made MasterChief, Instead of having somebody pin me, I had all the women at the base in Portland that I had helped pass my anchors around the room. And then I had a female captain that had mentored me, Captain Gretchen Bailey, pin them on me. And that meant the world to me, because those anchors, that me taking on that responsibility, it's not for me. I'm not special. People don't call me because I'm special. They call because they want help. And if I have that trust and I can give that back and I can use that, that's what making MasterChief is about. Helping the people that will come along behind me and continue to change our culture. I was at headquarters recently to sit on a panel, and I went into their chief's mess at lunch, and I realized and looked around the room, there were more female chiefs in the mess than men. And I just thought, man, we're getting there. Like, we're almost there. And to this day, whenever I'm on a base, whenever I'm traveling to a recruiting office, whenever I'm at headquarters, visiting a unit, every single time I see a female with an anchor on, I smile. And it just brings me peace to know that what I experienced when I first joined, is it still there? Absolutely. Do we have an opportunity to make it better? Yes. I love the Coast Guard. I don't hate the Coast Guard. It has given me a lot. And I don't think the ship is bad. I think we have bad crew members on board that need to go in order for us to change. So that is my story.
Thanks for listening to our storytellers. Narrative therapy is just one modality to help a person work through their trauma. I know that the stories can be difficult to listen to. However, it's tremendously therapeutic to take trauma from your brain, give it a voice, and then let it be heard. So I thank you for taking the time. Any opinions expressed by our storytellers are their own lived experiences. They're not representative of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's efforts currently to address sexual assault and sexual harassment in our service, or the U.S. government. Thank you.